Today, we're going to talk about something fascinating, the surprising origin story of counseling. This isn't a profession that was carefully designed in some quiet lab. Nope, it was accidentally forged, piece by piece, as a reaction to more than 100 years of dramatic, world-changing events. So, have you ever really stopped to think about where counseling came from? I mean, really, did it start in some dusty philosopher's study? Or maybe a fancy university lecture hall? Well, the real story is way more dramatic and, honestly, a whole lot more interesting. Yeah, counseling is what you might call an accidental profession. It didn't begin with some grand overarching theory. It literally popped up out of pure necessity. It was shaped by the chaos of war, the desperation of economic collapse, and the energy of social revolution. It's a story all about adapting on the fly, and we're going to walk through exactly how it all went down. All right, let's set the scene. We're heading back to the early 1900s. Picture this. America is industrializing at a crazy pace. Cities are just exploding with new people, and regular folks are facing challenges they've never seen before. The very first counselors, well, they weren't trying to invent a new profession. They were just trying to help people figure out how to survive in this chaotic new world. So the big idea that really got the ball rolling was something called vocational guidance. And the guy behind it, Frank Parsons, had this revolutionary thought. He was like, hey, what if we could help people find jobs that actually fit their skills and what they're passionate about? I mean, think about it. In an age of faceless factories and assembly lines, just focusing on the individual person, that was an absolutely radical idea. But here's the thing, it wasn't just Parsons. The early seeds of counseling were actually planted by 3 different people, all kind of working at the same time. You had Frank Parsons focusing on careers, right? Then you had Clifford Beers, who was making this powerful push for better, more humane mental health care. And at the same time, Jesse B. Davis was starting the very first guidance programs inside schools. So you've got 3 different people tackling 3 different problems, but they all came to the same conclusion. People needed help finding their way. But what really took these small, separate movements and lit a fire under them, what turned them into a real profession, was a series of massive national crises. Seriously, from the 1910s all the way through the 1940s, history itself was the engine driving the explosive growth of counseling. I mean, just try to wrap your head around this. You've got World War I, then bam, the Great Depression hits. And then right after that, an even bigger, more devastating World War II. Each one of these events created these huge psychological and logistical problems. And every single time, the government turned to this new field of psychology and asked, hey, can you help us solve this? Okay, so first up, World War I. The military had a gigantic problem on its hands. How do you sort through millions of new recruits and put them in the right jobs? The solution? The Army Alpha and Army Beta intelligence tests. These were the first ever mass-produced psychological tests. And just like that, assessment wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a critical tool for the war, and it cemented testing as a core part of this new profession. And then, of course, the Great Depression hits. Now, the problem wasn't about placing soldiers, it was about helping millions of jobless civilians find any work they could. And out of that crisis, you get the U.S. Employment Service and the very first Dictionary of Occupational Titles, this huge government project to basically list and describe every job imaginable to help get people back to work. And you can see how each crisis just builds on the last one, right? By World War II, the military didn't just need soldiers, they needed highly specialized people, technicians, pilots, intelligence officers. So psychological testing became even more important. But here's the real game changer. After the war, the government, through the VA, actually started paying for counselors to get trained at universities to help the returning soldiers. This was a huge turning point. For the first time, there was an actual professional pipeline. So with all this new government money and this new sense of importance, the profession starts to enter a new phase. The questions weren't just about how do we do this anymore. They started to get philosophical. Like, what even is counseling? What's the right way to do it? It was time for this young field to figure out who it wanted to be when it grew up. And this led to a pretty big debate. In one corner, you had E.G. Williamson. He was all about that trait and factor idea that came from the early career stuff. Basically, measure the person's traits, find a job that matches. The counselor is the expert, plain and simple. But in the other corner was Carl Rogers. He came along and said, hold on a second. The client is the expert on their own life. He pushed for a totally different, non-directive approach where the counselor's main job is just to create a safe space for the person to grow on their own. And this debate, it would shape the entire future of therapy. Okay, so the 1950s, this decade was absolutely huge. This is when everything started to get official. Key professional organizations finally got started, like the APGA, the American Personnel and Guidance Association, and ASCA for school counselors. Even the American Psychological Association got on board and officially created a special division just for counseling psychology. And remember, all of this is happening with the Cold War looming in the background. And then 1957. The Soviets launched Sputnik, and it sends this massive shockwave through America. Suddenly, everyone's terrified we're losing the space race. So Congress passes the National Defense Education Act, which basically poured a ton of money into schools to find the smartest kids. And the effect on counseling was just staggering. We're talking a 125% increase in school counselors in just a few years. They went from 12,000 to 27,000. You could see the space race literally launched the school counseling profession into orbit. So as we roll into the 60s and 70s, the whole focus shifts yet again. While the government was busy looking outward, focused on the Cold War, this incredible wave of social change was building right here at home. And that turbulence would push counseling to grow way beyond just schools and careers and out into the community. You had the civil rights movement, the women's movement, all these powerful calls for social justice, and they fundamentally challenged the profession. It wasn't enough anymore to just look at a person's individual traits. Counselors now had to grapple with really complex issues, things like culture, systemic barriers, and how people develop over their entire lifespan. And moving out into the community like that, well, it demanded a whole new level of professionalism. And so the final pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The government started funding community mental health centers. Then, in 1976, Virginia became the first state to pass a licensure law, which finally defined what it means to be a counselor. And finally, you get these national organizations that accredit university programs and certify individual counselors. These were the last big steps to making counseling a truly legitimate profession. Which brings us to the modern era. And just like it always has, the profession is still adapting, still evolving to meet new challenges. We're talking about everything from technology and managed care to a much, much deeper understanding of trauma and what wellness really means. Yeah, the landscape for counselors today is incredibly complex. They're on the front lines helping people deal with trauma and crisis. They're advocating for social justice. They're trying to navigate the maze of managed care. And they're using new tech like telehealth. And underneath all of that, there's a really big philosophical shift happening. You can see this whole evolution perfectly just by looking at the name changes of the main professional group. It started out as the American Personnel and Guidance Association, all about jobs. Then it became the American Association for Counseling and Development. And today, it's simply the American Counseling Association, the ACA. That name reflects a much broader, more holistic identity. And that new identity is really summed up perfectly here. The whole focus is shifting away from just treating illness and moving toward a proactive, holistic idea of wellness. It's about helping people achieve their best possible health and well-being, body, mind, and spirit, across their entire lives. So, when you look back, from helping people find jobs in the industrial age to providing trauma-informed care in our digital world, counseling has always been this incredibly dynamic field. It's constantly held up a mirror to the needs of society. And that leaves us with one big question, right? What challenges are waiting just around the corner to write the next chapter for this remarkable accidental profession?